Hey everybody, welcome to episode 70 of the Askdap show, where we answer your Volkswagen Audi questions. On this episode, we talk about modifying wastegates for more power, blow-off valves sucking in air, and heat that's still hot when it's off.
Don via email says, I have a 2011 Audi Avant A4 2.0 with 63,000 miles. I bought it with 42,000 miles 2 years ago. I have noticed that I have to add a half quart of oil every 500 miles. I have just become aware of the reasons for high oil consumption. I have not done anything to remedy the problem along with the cam follower issue that you have shown. I plan to fix the cam follower issue soon, but how long can I go with the oil consumption issue?
All right, Don, so the 2011 Audis were really up to 2011, and I think some 2012s, oil consumption issues. It's pretty common on those models. The issue relating to that was around the piston rings themselves. What would have to happen on those cars, there was a TSB about it, and I don't know if there was a recall. I think some of those cars actually did have a recall on them where you would actually replace the pistons in the vehicle with new ones. So that would be the route to go down to actually fix heavy oil consumption. That oil consumption amount, while it is absurd amount, falls near the threshold of acceptable oil consumption on VW and Audis is, I think it's a quart every 1,000 miles. I think you have to check. It probably varies by model, but that's generally the threshold in which they would do that. Based on mileage, I don't know if 63,000 is too far for that. I'm not as privy on Audi stuff to a lot of that warranty finite details on the extensions of stuff like that. What would happen under the circumstance of if it wasn't a warranty? They would have to verify that you did have an oil consumption issue. What they would do is bring your car in after do an oil change per se, mark the dipstick and your mileage, and then take note of that. And then they would probably have you come back maybe every like 500 or every 1,000 miles to determine how low you were, to determine if your oil consumption was considered to be excessive. If they do, again, I would contact your local Audi dealer with a VIN of your vehicle, tell them you're having oil consumption problems. I'm sure they're not going to be shocked, and then go down the road of obviously addressing if that is something covered in the warranty. If not, something you can reach out to Audi of America to see if it would fall within your warranty. If it doesn't, as far as I know, on those cars, pistons are almost always the solution to that. And I'll link to the Audi pistons in the description where you can check out the ones for that vehicle, and hopefully you won't have to pay for getting them installed on the vehicle.
Phantom1107 via Reddit says, I took my car to an independent shop for an oil change, and they told me it had the code P2015 for the manifold flap motor. They said it was a bit of a rough idle and recommended a tune-up. Now after looking into the code, it seems that the intake is covered under an extended warranty for the 2011s. They must have cleared the code because I can't see it in the Torque app. Is there any way the dealer can see older codes, or do I have to wait for the code to come back? It's been a week and I haven't had the check engine light, but the idle is still rough and I'd like to get this replaced under warranty.
A couple things on this one. Obviously, we've covered to death the information about intake manifolds and extended warranties and all that stuff. If you're not familiar with what that is, I'll put a link to the article we have that talks all about intake manifold failures on TSIs here, where you can check that out. Couple things. First, this is kind of a good case for why you should bring your vehicle to either qualified independent repair shops and or dealerships. The fact that anybody would recommend a tune-up to address a check engine light for intake manifold flap runner faults is frankly just ridiculous. There's no correlation between an intake flap runner and, let's say, spark plugs. Now, in regards to addressing your issue around the check engine light, check engine lights are something that once you erase the faults, they're gone forever. They're never coming back. The good news is that since that's a problem, or bad news, since that's a problem that's still going on, the faults will come back. It may take a little bit of time, so I would just suggest drive it within probably a week, maybe 2 max, depending on how much you drive the car. The car will go through setting its readiness codes. Basically, readiness codes are self-checks that the car does on itself, which will then eventually set the check engine light when it goes through setting the correct parameters for everything and then realizes that you have intake manifold flap problems. So couple weeks you should be okay, and all those faults will be in the system, and you can take your car in to have it replaced under your extended warranty.
Juan Sebastian Cox via Facebook says, we can set the wastegate for more boost on a Mark 7 GTI?
All right, Juan, so modifying the wastegate in some way to give you more boost on a car. For anybody who's not familiar with what wastegates are, we have a video that I talked about wastegates, and then we compared internal wastegates versus external wastegates. I'll put a link to that video here. It's a pretty in-depth video that talks about and explains wastegates pretty thoroughly, but essentially wastegates help control the boost of the vehicle. They are the actual controller of the boost. So modifying that could potentially get you more boost on the vehicle. A couple things about that. First, you shouldn't really modify boost on a vehicle without modifying other parameters to supply the appropriate fuel required for the increased power and boost, along with other settings to obviously maximize power. For that reason, in general, it's not a great idea to just turn up the boost either through modifying the wastegate or a manual boost controller. Sometimes, most cars will, if they're smart enough, will kind of readjust. If you start modifying a car's wastegate, especially current model VW and Audis, it's not really going to be effective, because if you just modify the wastegate, maybe change the length of the rod to make sure it stays and pushes more boost out, the ECU is going to be fighting you the entire time. So it's going to be constantly trying to compensate for what you modified, which is why ECU tunes, modifying cars through that method, is the method that most people go down for modifying these cars, or really the required method to actually modify them to get more power. It also is the safest way to do it, because tuners like Unitronic, that we're a dealer of, and other tuners do all the R&D to determine safe parameters, the ones who subscribe to that type of tuning, safe parameters to allow the vehicle to have maximum performance while still being a safe vehicle to operate without any exposure to damage. So for that reason, I would say highly recommend going down the road of tuning. I'll put a link to all the information we have about Mark 7 GTI tunes here, where you can check that out, and you also have UniConnect, which is an option for you to tune your car at home, that we have information there as well.
Kevin H via email says, I bought a blow-off valve not that long ago, and I installed it yesterday. Everything was done right, and I followed how you installed yours in your Mark 7 GTI. Nothing seemed wrong when I was driving it, but every now and then I hear almost like it's sucking air back in. I only noticed it in 4th and 5th gear. Just wondering if you had noticed that on your GTI, or if there was possibly something I did wrong when I was installing it.
All right, Kevin, so you have a blow-off valve in your car, and you have what sounds to me like is a normal functioning operation, and what you're hearing is probably not sucking in air, but actually bleeding off air. So on a normal vehicle, a lot of vehicles would have a blow-off valve that is regulated by vacuum, and on this car it actually is as well when you convert to, let's say, the Forge one, which I believe you purchased from us, which thank you so much, I appreciate the purchase. But basically what that does is converts from electronic actuation, which was what the factory diverter valve would be, to a electronically actuated vacuum actuator. So what it does is it controls a solenoid valve that sends vacuum to the blow-off valve to open and close it. What happens though is, because you'll have that diverter valve, because it's normally electronic, it will fluctuate under partial load to open and close, and so what you're hearing is kind of a bleed off of boost at partial throttle, which is pretty normal function, and you shouldn't be worried about it. The only time you definitely should be worried is if when you mash that throttle, that if you still hear bleeding coming off, maybe for a split second before it closes it might bleed some boost, but pretty much guarantee that once you're hitting the pedal, it should close, and then you should hold boost all the way until you let off, and then it will blow off again. So what you're describing sounds like normal operation. It's probably not sucking air, it's probably bleeding off some of the boost in between that partial throttle, because the ECU is actuating that valve open and closed to accommodate the fact that it's at partial throttle, and you're not going to be putting boost or even full boost or probably even partial boost into the engine.
Sunny Eddie via Reddit says, why does my heat come on at high speeds? I noticed this twice so far. During high-speed driving and quick acceleration, heat will come out of the vents without me touching the controls.
All right, so you have heat coming out of your vents when the fan blower motor is on 0. This is probably not super shocking. Basically, the way a heater system works is you have what looks like a radiator inside the dashboard that all the air comes from outside, runs across that, and then comes out of the vents once it passes through there to heat up the air. There are doors inside that box to actually control the temperature of the air. It's called a blender flap, and it will mix the air together to determine the temperature of the air that comes out. But basically what's happening is when you have your heat turned all the way to hot, that the blender is set so that obviously you have maximum heat coming out. And when you're driving at high speeds, depending on, and this is common on, I guess, most VWs I've seen this on. There are probably some vehicles, depending on aerodynamics and the way the cowl's probably designed, it may not be something that happens. But when you get that high speed, the air starts getting forced down into that cowl through that duct, which obviously, even though you don't have the fan pushing air across there, it's actually still pushing air because it's being forced from the outside due to being at high speed. And also at highway speeds. So that's pretty normal. A couple ways you can avoid that. You can turn the air obviously to a cooler position, cold or in the center. That will alleviate that somewhat. Or if you don't want any air flowing through there, you can turn on recirculate, which will close off that duct to the outside, which would prevent that from being a problem continuing if you have the blower motor off and heat on. So either way should address that issue, but it's not that big of a deal and it's not something you should be concerned about. Thank you so much for watching episode 70 of the Askdap Show, where we answer your Volkswagen Audi questions. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.